I was in the middle of a press conference when my watch started vibrating. They are coming for you. Run. I got into a car with my colleagues, Claudia and Henry, and we sped to a nearby embassy. The ambassador accepted us and tried to put us at ease for a couple of hours. He asked how long we expected to stay. This won't take long, I thought. It was 2 weeks. I had heard about this happening to other people, but it's very different when you are the main character in the story. The first thing you learn is that this is real. They could put you in jail if they wanted. It doesn't matter what the truth is. You will never see an arrest warrant. All that matters is what they say. And they said I was a terrorist, I was a conspirator, and a traitor. We stayed silent, and on December 20, 2023, they released us in a prisoner exchange. But that was the beginning. We were not free. They had canceled our passports and frozen our bank accounts. I had to report to a judge every 2 weeks, like so many others. But as I mentioned, that was just the beginning. Next January, the regime officially disqualified Maria Corina from running for president. There was no trial, no evidence, and no due process. It was a political ban, not a legal one. She was simply a big threat to Maduro. After that, the regime started targeting our campaign leaders one by one. What was our crime? Managing a campaign and winning an election. Maria Corina decided to keep fighting to defend the people's mandate in the primaries. Then, on March 20, 2024, I was at the office when a new press conference announced that they were issuing another arrest warrant for me and 10 of my colleagues. 2 of them, Henry and Ignora, were abducted by the political police. The rest of us had to run. I raced to the Argentine embassy. During the afternoon, more arrived. Magali, the head of the campaign, Claudia, the communications coordinator, Humberto, the election coordinator, Omar, the political coordinator, Fernando, the alliances advisor, and me. I looked around and thought, well, we have everyone we need here. This is the new campaign office in the embassy. Time was running out. Maria Corina could not be a candidate. Neither could Corina Lloris, her second attempt. Finally, Ambassador Edmundo González Urrutia stepped up to be on the ballot. We knew the opportunity that was in front of us. They never expected us to keep campaigning from inside the embassy while Maria Corina and Edmundo were traveling around the country. But we did, because it was a survival decision, the only possible one. On election day, I remember standing on the embassy balcony overlooking Caracas. It was the first time I couldn't vote in my own country. That day, one of my missions was coordinating 64 international observers to visit the country. The regime deported every single one of them. But we had nearly 1 million Venezuelans volunteers at polling stations around the country. They collected the tally sheets, scanned them, and uploaded them to the cloud. We made history. That night, the regime declared Maduro the winner. But we knew the truth. We won by a landslide. After that, everything changed. Maria Corina had to go into hiding. Edmundo González was forced into exile. The regime was ready to attack anyone connected to the campaign before, during, or after the election. People were sent to prison, forced into exile, or pushed into hiding. In simple but painful words, state terrorism. We were still stuck inside the embassy. Over the next 10 months, they did everything they could to break us and force us to surrender. They cut off the electricity and water completely. We spent 5 months without power, depending on a solar panel. 5 months without running water. We drank water from the ambassador's pool in the worst unhealthy conditions. Without refrigeration, or food rotted. We rationed everything and sometimes ate only once a day. and our neighbors were those who you never expected to have, the embassies of Russia and North Korea. I remember gathering as a group to discuss possible scenarios in that moment. Maybe the regime will allow some of us to leave, but who would stay and who would go? We decided sometimes that I always remember very proudly. No one leaves unless everyone leaves. Then, in December, 9 months in, we realized that they had turned the neighbor house into a police surveillance post with masked men pointing assault rifles straight at us. This was no longer an embassy. It was a diplomatic prison. And I realized that dying was a real possibility. Of course, I couldn't sleep. I was terrified. We all were, knowing that at any minute, the regime could storm the embassy and take us to prison or worse. But we decided to resist, and fear became our engine. We were free in mind and spirit. In those final months, our only source of hope was the wild macaws or guacamayas, wild parrots that flying overhead in Caracas. They started coming down to visit us. They would sit on our shoulders and our arms. At first, they were a symbol of trust and freedom. And then, in May 2025, more than 400 days after we had arrived to that embassy, they felt like a signal from the universe that it was time to fly. We had already planned to escape twice with no success. But the regime made one massive error. They had cut electricity to our building, and that meant their security cameras were off too. We figured out where the blind spots were and made our escape. They discovered it 4 days later. After we were safe, we learned the regime had been building a tunnel underground to extract us, to make us disappear or kill us. But our escape proved that the regime is not perfect. They are divided. There are people inside Maduro's system fighting for democracy in secret. Without their help and without the international support, we would not have escaped. I want to especially thank the US government for their leadership in our rescue and all the courageous people that risked their lives to help us, including the Argentine government that protected us. I don't like to think about what would happen if we stayed in that embassy much longer. But international law is supposed to protect people like us. It should not be a shield for governments to attack their own people. Diplomacy and international law are not useless, but their rules have not been effective in confronting criminal authoritarian regimes. What do you tell survivors who are hidden in an embassy because they are supposed to be protected, but no one is actually protecting them? What happens when, before the eyes of the world, an embassy becomes a prison? What do you tell the political prisoners' families who are waiting for the international community to do something in the midst of despair? Why do we keep arriving too late? What is diplomacy for if it's not used to stand up to injustice? Today, I'm forced into exile like many others. So I understand something very clearly. You are never truly free until your country is free. The threats against you are permanent, but you keep fighting for those who cannot do it. And we have a mantra: no one is left behind. That's why we are working harder than ever, because Maduro is gone, but Venezuela is not liberated yet. There are still nearly 800 political prisoners in jail and 30 million Venezuelans inside and outside the country getting ready for the final day of liberation. As I was writing this speech, two of my colleagues I mentioned earlier, Henry and Dignora, were released after nearly 2 years in prison. But today I want to take a moment to recognize the brave Venezuelan people, to recognize my colleagues, and to recognize every exile and political prisoner who has been released, and those who are still in jail, as well as their families, especially those who are today, as we speak, on hunger strike in Zona 7 in Caracas, demanding freedom. Today, I call for the total, immediate, and unconditional release of all political prisoners, civilian and militaries, because there is no transition with repression. And I want to be clear on this idea. There is no transition with repression. It's not possible to talk about transition with repression. It is the brave Venezuelan people who give me hope for the future of Venezuela. I trust them. We trust each other. And that is why I will keep fighting until the very end. Hasta el final. Venezuela será libre. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much. Thank you. Viva Venezuela libre. Libertad. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I speak as someone whose life has been shaped by discrimination, neglection, and exclusion. Coming from Rojava, Western Kurdistan, what some people call northeastern Syria, the Kurds' right to live in dignity under self-governance or independence doesn't come only from the sacrifices we made fighting global jihad or ISIS, the Islamic State. We deserve dignity because we are rooted in our homeland in the Middle East. Dignity is not something earned through war. It's something every people inherently deserves. We built self-defense not for power, we built it for survival and paid one of the highest prices. The Yazidi Kurds in Sinjar mountain, named in Kurdish as Chiaye Shingali. I saw thousands of displaced families fleeing with nothing but their children in their arms, some mothers holding the dead bodies of their babies to their chests. In that moment, I remember tears pouring from my eyes, just as sweat poured from my skin on that hot summer day in August 2014. I saw what jihadis do when they believe is no one watching, but I was watching. Then after 4 months, of that, ISIS took me hostage and threw me into an underground prison. For 280 days, in 7 different prisons, and 100 days of solitary confinement, I lived inside the system I had been reporting on. I saw how they operate from the inside, how they weaponize religion, erase identity, reward obedience, and punish difference. I saw how cruelty is normalized and how fear is organized. I cannot even begin to count the number of times our captors would blindfold us, line us up, and act like they were going to kill us, and then not. One of the times, a jihadi from Libya held a pistol right next to my head and pulled the trigger. The shot was so loud that for a moment I thought it was really the end. But seconds later, they were laughing. That was their sense of humor. Mocking us by playing their favorite execution scene. It was a psychological torture. It was a game to them. I survived those 9 months in captivity and got liberated thanks to the brave Kurdish female and male fighters of the defense units, the same who fought ISIS and liberate the region from the jihadi ghost. But many with me didn't survive. When I was finally released, I promised myself that I would dedicate my life to defending minority groups, because I had seen what happens when the world decides some lives are negotiable, and how West's normalization of extremism today with the jihadi failed de facto government in Syria is creating devastating consequences for us.
In December 2024, when the dictator Assad left power, the Western world was so relieved, they said, finally, the brutal dictator is gone. Now, al-Jolani will bring stability to the region. What a naive fantasy. For decades, we have been brutally attacked on two fronts. On one side, by the government, Assad, and the other side, by the religious extremists, jihadis like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Al-Nusra, and so on, from different jihadi factions supported by Turkey and Qatar. So where does Jolani come from? This new leader who will bring stability to the region? He falls into the second category. He's a Salafi extremist. He comes from Al-Qaeda, then he built the Islamic Caliphate in Syria with a direct mandate from al-Baghdadi, who had already back then established it in Iraq. And after he moved to Syria, he built Al-Nusra Front, then Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, then Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, known as HTS. All these mentioned factions are jihadi Salafi terror groups. I have spent years of my youth tracking these factions and know their past very well. Jolani is not a mystery to us, or to the West, or to the UN. The US State Department had a $10 million bounty on his head. And by the way, they still didn't delete the social media posts regarding that bounty. But Jolani's extremism did not disappear with his new suit and colorful tie. All that changed is his uniform, and maybe his beard style is a bit shorter, maybe 2 centimeters shorter than before. He knows exactly what he wants to hear. I saw and I still see to this day how he deceives journalists and diplomats with his sugar-coated speeches and statements, while on the ground, we witness something else, completely the opposite. Committing horrific massacres in less than 1 year. 3 horrific massacres targeting Christians, Kurds, killing more than 8,000 people and arresting other thousands of them. He is issuing performative presidential decrees, beautiful on paper, but meaningless in real life. Ink on paper that doesn't protect a single minority life. This is not a reform. This is a wolf in sheep's clothing. In the last months, I have watched with huge frustration as Western leaders who speak eloquently about democracy and human rights shake hands with these extremists. A former German Minister of Defense, now holding a senior position at the European Union, recently met with Jolani. This was right after that Jolani started a military campaign against the Kurds. She promised him 620 million euros without any clear public enforceable conditions at all. When I watched the news, I felt like she was rewarding him for all the massacres he commits. These officials who legitimize jihadi-linked leaders in the name of stability are not choosing justice and peace. They are choosing an illusion of short-term convenience. You cannot fight extremism by empowering its architects, and you cannot promote democracy while ignoring minority rights. Minorities are not a side issue. They are an early warning system of every failing state. I have seen this in my own life. 14 years ago, as a high school student, an administrator threatened to expel me simply because of speaking Kurdish to a friend. Not shouting, not protesting, just speaking my own language. As I said, this kind of discrimination is an early warning system. It was only 1 year later that 5,000 Kurds were massacred. We didn't feel safe under the rule of dictator Assad, but today we are suffering a worse de facto regime. And the West believes that we should integrate with these militant extremists. They push us to sign fragile agreements to avoid danger, fragile agreements with jihadis who practice taqiyya, concealing their beliefs to avoid danger till they gain more power and find the right moment to attack the non-believers. The non-believers like you all sitting here in this room. Sorry to say, but this is how they see us. This is how jihadis look to the outside world. It makes no sense to integrate with a jihadi failed state known as Syria. The Kurdish people are liberal, democratic, and openly anti-jihadist. We want to live free from religious coercion, free from violence, free from fear. And that's what we deserve, not just because we fought against ISIS and liberated huge territories from terror, but because we have the right like anyone else. We carry the voices of all minorities who refuse extremism. Until Druze, Jews, Alawites, Christians, Yazidis, Assyrians, and other minorities can live in safety, dignity, and equality, the entire region will remain unstable. We do not ask for pity. We ask for courage and consistency. Even in the United States, where politicians hardly agree on anything, they can agree on this. Recently, the Republican Senator Lindsey Graham and Democrat Richard Blumenthal introduced Save the Kurds Act to affirm that the Kurdish people must be protected. Not as a favor, not as a repayment, but because the safety of the Kurdish people is essential in the region. When people are targeted for who they are, societies begin to fracture. When people are protected in their differences, then peace has room to grow. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kai Mareska, and I'm a student at École Moser in Geneva. The empty chair on this stage is dedicated to Mikhail Krieger, a Russian opposition activist and political prisoner who has been jailed for defending human rights in Russia and for protesting the regime's war on Ukraine. For decades, Krieger has advocated democratic freedoms and the release of political prisoners. He co-founded the Union of Solidarity with political prisoners and is active in various other Russian human rights groups. Krieger has repeatedly faced persecution and detention for his activism and participation in peaceful protests. Despite the risks, he continued to speak out against injustice and repression. In February 2022, after Vladimir Putin launched Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Krieger publicly denounced the war. On November 3rd, 2022, Krieger was seized in Moscow by mass security officers, thrown to the ground and detained. His home was searched and he was placed in pretrial detention for 2 months. His crime was posting online against Putin's regime to protest Russia's war on Ukraine. The state indicted him under false charges of inciting hatred and justifying terrorism. On May 17, 2023, a military court sentenced Krieger to 7 years in a penal colony. Even behind bars, Krieger has continued to resist Putin's regime through acts of quiet resistance. In September 2025, he began a hunger strike in protest of his conditions, garnering international attention and celebrity support against his unjust imprisonment. Most recently, in November 2025, Mikhail was transferred to an even more brutal special penal colony for 6 months. He was punished for simply greeting someone through a fence while on a walk. Today, we say to Mikhail Krieger, while you are confined to a prison cell, we gather here at the Geneva summit to honor your courageous fight against tyranny and to demand your freedom. We gather to say that you are not alone. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Grace Jin Drexel, and on October 10th, my father, Pastor Ezra Jin, was arrested by the Chinese authorities along with 27 other pastors and church leaders of Zion Church. 18 total remain in prison today. This crackdown represents one of the largest takedown of an independent Christian congregation in China since the Cultural Revolution. A sweep so brazen it has drawn international condemnation. I urge the Chinese government to release all of Zion Church members immediately and unconditionally. To understand why my father is in prison, you must understand that leadership in China in recent years has embarked on a systematic campaign to achieve total state control of religious life over China through what the government calls Sinozization of religion, officially framed as making religion more Chinese. Let me be clear, Sinozization is not about making religion more Chinese. It is repression, plain and simple. Christians in China have been Chinese for generations. We already have Chinese Bibles, sing indigenous hymns, and are led by Chinese pastors. But beginning in 2018, a wave of persecution and crackdown on all religions began on the auspices of Sinozization. It included removing of crosses and replacing them with portraits of Xi Jinping, switching out hymns and with revolutionary party songs, rewriting sermons to align with socialist core values, and shutting down or even leveling churches. This crackdown has targeted Muslims, especially the Uyghur communities in Western China, Buddhists, and other religious groups. My father founded Zion Church in 2007 with a mission to be faithful to God's word and to serve the communities around us. They are not opposed to the Chinese authorities, but have sought to enrich the society. They merely ask to be free from the control of the Chinese Communist Party, a self-identified atheist party, and the sacred decisions of the church. Like faithful Christians everywhere, my father's church holds firm the position that thou shalt have no other gods before me. In 2018, Zion Church became a target specifically because church leadership refused to install 23 facial recognition cameras inside the sanctuary to track and monitor believers. In response, the police brutally seized the church buildings and imposed an exit ban on my father, forbidding him from leaving the country. Yet even repression cannot extinguish faith. My father and his congregation did not give up in the face of these actions. They developed a hybrid online-offline model, and beyond anyone's wildest imagination, when COVID hit in 2020 and all gatherings were forced to a halt, Zion Church's online model allowed our church gatherings to expand nationwide, launching 100 church meeting places across 40 cities in China. The church grew to the largest size it's ever been, reaching 10,000 people daily. Perhaps that's what embarrassed the CCP. Now, a new and more severe wave of persecution is underway for my father's church and other churches in China. My father is now in prison because he held firmly to his faith and because he truly loved and cared for the people and served the community out of love and not control. My father's church served the vulnerable, gave to the poor, and ministered to the broken families. My father is not a very confrontational person. He is firm in his convictions, but is also the gentlest of souls. Unlike the stereotypical image of an Asian father, my father doted on me and my brothers liberally. He would always give me a big hug and greet me dramatically. "Oh, my beautiful daughter." We would often take evening walks as a family, arms linked, and watch Korean singing competition that often moved all of us to tears. I have rarely seen him angry or critical of anyone, which often benefited me growing up. He was always patient, always kind, and always giving people grace. And he had an incredible sense of humor and optimism, even in prison. However, now my father and the 17 detained leaders of Zion Church are made to sleep without beds on the cold floor. They are subject to endless interrogation and sleep deprivation as punishment. They do not have access to the doctor's prescribed medication. Many of them, including my father, have severe health concerns and are growing worse under prison conditions. I have not seen my beloved father in person in 7 years. He was not there to walk me down the aisle in my wedding, and we have never danced the father-daughter dance. I now stand before you in the most vulnerable state, 5 months pregnant and traveling across the world to plead for my father's release. I do not know, and I do so knowing the grim reality that many prisoners of the Chinese government never see their families again. Since I began advocating for my father and the release of other detained church leaders, my family has also experienced transnational repression. That is, we have been harassed and targeted by the Chinese government abroad to sow fear. We have received threatening phone calls and have been watched and followed in Washington, D.C. I am sometimes fearful. After all, I seek to expose the second most powerful nation in the world. Yet, I believe that we are asked to take courage and to speak truth, and that the God who made heaven and earth will be by our side. Similarly, I urge all of us here today to take courage, to use your voice and your influence in whatever sphere, to speak the names of those detained. My father, Pastor Ezra Jin, Pastor Gao Yingjia, Pastor Yin Huibin, Pastor Wang Lin, and all the others who are detained. Pastor Gao Chenfu of Light of Zion Church, Pastor Wang Yi of Early Rain Covenant Church, etc. Call for the Chinese government to release all of Zion Church's leaders immediately and unconditionally. Do not accept China's trampling of human rights and universal freedom with silence. If left unchecked, Beijing's wave of repression will reverberate around the world for freedom of religion and human rights as a whole. As a Christian, I draw strength in knowing that my God is a good God, and that even in these bleakest moments, God will be able to use for good. As my father wrote in prison, God has indeed used his power to uphold us. I believe that God is also testing us during this time, like refining silver, painful but full of love. God will not abandon us. Our work and our prayers are not in vain. I am grateful for everyone here today, grateful to the Geneva Summit, and for all those who worked so hard to make this event happen. Thank you to all the leaders of my country and the leaders around the world who stand with us. And most of all, thank you to all the countless brave individuals who confronted oppression in China and around the world, serving as an example for us all. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, for the next speech, interpretation is available in English and French. Headphones can be found on the tables or next to the chairs. Please select your preferred language. Channel 1 for English, Channel 2 for French. Thank you.
My name is Junior, just Junior. I was born in Cuba in 1982. The generation before mine had names inspired by the Soviet culture. Cosmonauts were all the rage: Yuri, Alexei, even Laika. When our parents got tired of that, they started giving us the names they heard in American movies. I was lucky. They named me Junior. But I had friends named Danger or Usnavi, like the United States Navy. I did theater in Cuba for over 20 years. At first, they were harmless comedies. But when you try to seriously represent the reality of a country like Cuba, it's impossible to avoid the plays becoming absurdist or political theater. And I ended up doing political theater. I think my parents should have named me Danger. My teachers lived in panic with each of my works, but they taught me a trick. As long as my characters spoke and not me, I had an alibi. As long as it all sounded like a metaphor or allegory, I was more or less safe. That's how I survived for a while. In a work called Blood, they mentioned political prisoners. In another called Semen, I criticized indoctrination in schools. In Passport, I was talking about the exodus of young people fleeing the country. Playwrights of my generation discovered that the officials in charge of censorship were only trained to detect metaphors. But when plays directly attacked the regime, they were somewhat lost. They wondered, what did they mean? Then came my most political work of all, Jacuzzi, where it wasn't a character who declared himself against a revolution. It was myself. The character wasn't called Jose or Pedro. He was called Junior. I crossed the red line, and I crossed it for good. Until then, I was just an inconvenient writer. Watched, yes, with state security breathing down my neck, yes, but until then, it was something they thought they could control. Because theater is something that happens in small and closed spaces. On November 27, 2020, artists took to the streets. We stood in front of the Ministry of Culture in La Habana. It was something that had never happened before in Cuba. We demanded the release of other detained young artists, the young people from the San Isidro movement. We demanded end to censorship, an end to repression, and the start of a peaceful dialogue to find a democratic and sovereign solution to an unpopular and exhausted regime. That day was beautiful, beautifully naive. We truly believed that we could change the country where we were born with songs and poems. The regime treated us as if we were worse than a pandemic. I was accused of being a CIA agent. The Cuban regime is not usually very original. 6 months later, on July 11, 2021, hundreds of thousands of Cubans took the streets to protest. They sang "Homeland and Life" rather than "Homeland or Death," the official slogan. The country's president, Miguel Díaz-Canel, gave an order to fight against his own people. They beat us up. A young man died. He was shot in the back by armed police. My friends and I were thrown into a garbage truck and taken to jail. The cameras of the FN news agency recorded that moment. That's why we were released the next day, but hundreds of young people remained imprisoned. Some received sentences of up to 20 years in prison. Upon my release from prison, I created a platform on Facebook, Archipelago. We wanted to show that Cuba is more than just an island, that it is plural, diverse, and that we all have the right to dream about our future. We asked for permission to march peacefully with white flowers, but they never allowed it. My house was surrounded. They cut off my phone and internet. They beheaded pigeons in front of my door. They blocked the windows with flags. They threatened my wife and my mother-in-law. And they assured me a 27-year prison sentence. I had to leave the country. I came to Spain with my wife. I was not the Messiah that many expected. I was more like Jonah, and I was swallowed by a big fish called exile. The Cuban regime tries to make us believe that when we leave, we disappear. My son stayed in Cuba, my only son. I haven't been able to see him since I left. He used to be 1.5 meters tall. Now he's over 6 feet tall and already has the shadow of a mustache. My father died a year ago inside Cuba. I couldn't say goodbye either. And I'm not the only one this has happened to. I didn't come here to play the victim. I've been lucky. I'm alive and I am free. That's why I prefer to talk about those who remain inside Cuba, trapped in the belly of a much darker and more bitter fish. A few days ago, 2 young men from Holguín, the city where I was born, were arrested. They're also accused of working for the CIA. Is there anyone from the CIA in this room? When all of us in Cuba who have been accused of working for the CIA receive our pay, Cuba's GDP will be larger than Switzerland's. These young men are named Ernesto and Camille. The crime was having a YouTube channel called El Cuartico. They spoke of freedom and democracy.
olunaku olwaleero tuzze okuba nga tukutuusaako summit egenda mu maaso e Geneva nga bwe twakutegeezezza ku mikutu gyaffe gyonna nti tugenda kuba tukugobereza engeri ensonga gye zigenda mu maaso. Mega Promotion TV abeera ng'otujoyininga ku mikutu gyaffe gyonna kwetuli platforms ez'enjawulo. Ojja kuba ng'otugoberera ku TikTok naye olunaku olwaleero tuli live wano ku YouTube era yita banno bonna osobola forwardinga linki yaffe n'ogisindikira oyo kubanga tugenda kuba tukulaga omukulu Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu engeri gy'agenda okuba nga presentingamu ensonga. Kakati nno we twatandikidde tulabye abantu bangi abazze nga bawaayo ensonga era abo oyo omwami gwe mulaba Junior ava Cuba essaawa zino yali ku lutimbe era nga bwe mulaba bwali mu kuba nga ayanja ensonga okuva mu nsi ye abasinga bawaŋŋanguka okuva mawanga abo bozze olaba. Twalabye ku mukyala gwe bayita Kumyum oyo defector yava North Korea mu mwaka gwa 2023 era yadduka ne famire ye bavaayo ne baba nga bajja okuba nga banja ensonga biki ebibatuukako. Kino nno twagala kusiigira kifaananyi nti n'omukulu Kyagulanyi Ssentamu lwaki bagenda mukyaza nga bw'olaba abantu abo abagenda mu maaso abali mu kuba nga babawa stories zaabwe okuva mu nsi zaabwe gye badduka, abalala banoonyezebwa. Kyekimu n'omukulu Kyagulanyi anoonyezebwa kwegamba alinga eyadduka mu nsi ye. Kyova olaba nti togenda mulaba live ng'abo bw'obalaba agenda kuba ku Zoom, ensonga zagenda kuba ziwera ku Zoom, bagenda mukyaliza ku mutimbagano. Tulabye omukyalo omulala, tulabye omwami omulala owe Venezuela bamuyita Lombodo Lopez. Oyo nno former political prisoner era yali akoze ekibiina kye bayita World Liberty Congress. Oyo nno avudde Venezuela. Venezuela nno jjukira omwami Maduro president yoyo eyakabanga awambibwa oba agibwayo e Venezuela by America oba mwite Trump. So omwami ono yali avuganya nnyo gundi Maduro, oyo omwami gweŋŋambye Lombodo Lopez okuva e Venezuela. Ze naye n'awa statements ze n'aba nga bwe tulindira Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu. Waliwo omukyalo omulala okuva e Hong Kong bamuyita Chloe Kang. Chloe Kang no freedom fighter era ye mukyala asinga okuba most wanted mu Beijing. Beijing nno nga bwe nkugambye Hong Kong gyava naye ekibuga Beijing mwasinga okuba ye muntu asinga okuba most wanted. Omukyala nnono naye mulwanirizi wa ddembe. Abantu bano benzize nga nkunnyonnyola badduse mu nsi zaabwe. Essaawa zino tulaba Junior okuva e Cuba amaliriza atugenda kubeera n'aboogezi abalala nga bwe tulinda Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu bw'agenda okuba ng'ajja. Agamba banno babeere nga batujoyininga olunaku olwaleero. Nze Katende Hood ate nja kuba neyungibwako Enjopo akyali mu kuseetinga byuma engeri gye tugenda okuba nga tubatuusaako entambula nga bwegenda. Batuyise Mega Promotion TV. Mpozi nja kusembyayo omukyalo omulala okuva e Russia era nga munnamawulire. Omukyalo ono yali yeopozinga okugenda okulumba Ukraine olutalo. Bamuyita Marina Zainakova. Naye avudde Ukraine, avuddeyo okubanga awa ensonga ze. Tugenda tambula mpola mpola. Enjopo soko tuwe ku ddoboozi ly'omukyalo oyo nga bwe tulindirira abalala abagenda okubanga bajja batuwe ensonga zaabwe. Gamba munno musindikire linki abeere nga atweyungako olunaku olwaleero.
Broadcast. To be honest, at that moment I was a part of huge Kremlin propaganda machine that spreads lies and hides the truth from people inside Russia. But the war against Ukraine was a point of no return for me. I couldn't not remain silent any longer. So on March 14, 2022, I went on a live broadcast and shouted, "No to war, stop the war." In my hands, I held a poster that read, "No war, stop the war. Don't believe propaganda. They are lying to you here, Russians, against the war." That image, thank you so much. That image traveled around the world within minutes. My protest lasted only 6 seconds, but these 6 seconds were the truth of the endless stream of Kremlin lies. They arrested me immediately. My lawyer told me, according new Russian law, so-called fake news about Russian army, I could face up to 15 years in prison. But I was ready to go to prison for the right to speak the truth and oppose the war. The Russian authorities didn't know how to handle my case. So they tried to ignore it, hoping I would get scared, stay silent, and just quietly leave the country. But I didn't stay silent. I continued to speak out against the war and publish anti-war posts. After the Russian missile strike killed children in the Ukrainian city of Vinnytsia, I protested again, this time near the Kremlin. I put 2 baby dolls at my feet and held the sign that read, "Putin is the killer. His soldiers are fascist. How many more children must die before you stop?" At 6 o'clock in the morning, around a dozen police officers broke into my home and took me to a detention center. I spent the night in a cell. The next day, a judge placed me under house arrest where I have to wait my verdict. That was the moment when I perfectly realized if I don't want to spend all my life in Russian prison, I have to escape. So, 9 days before the trial, I cut off my electronic bracelet and crossed the border illegally with my daughter under cover of night. Our escape was extremely dangerous. We changed cars 7 times. We spent night moving through the forest and plowed fields, getting stuck in the mud and hiding from border patrol vehicles. The stress was unbearable, but we escaped. And today we are living in France as a refugee. Since then, Russian authorities designated me as a foreign agent and an enemy of state. They sentenced me in absentia to 8.5 years in prison. My former husband, who supports so-called special military operation, used court to revoke my parental rights. And yet, I consider myself lucky. I managed to escape from Russia. Thousands of others did not. According to human rights organizations, there are around 2,000 political prisoners in Russia now, more than in the latest Soviet period. Today, I stand before you not to speak about myself. I stand here to speak about them. Look at this photo. This is Maria Ponomarenko, a journalist and mother of 2. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison for just one anti-war post. In prison, she was beaten by guards. She was psychologically abused. She was forcibly given antipsychotic drugs. She was put in solitary confinement at least 13 times. The conditions were terrible. There were rats running around. And even after all of this, Russian state keeps bringing new charges against her. This is 15 years old political prisoner, Arseny Turbin, the youngest political prisoner in Russia. He was arrested for handing out leaflets. Leaflets that ask one simple question: do you really need president? Look like this. He was interrogated alone, without his parents, without a lawyer. Investigators added the transcript and added confession he never made. Then they sentenced him to 5 years in prison for participating in a terrorist organization. 5 years, he was only 15. And municipal deputy Alexei Gorinov, he was the first person in Russia to be sentenced for speaking out against the war. In March 2022, he suggested holding a minute of silence for children killed in Ukraine. In any normal democratic country, that would be seen as simple human gesture. But in Russia, this small act of compassion was enough to send him to 7 years in prison. In prison, they secretly recorded him, and for anti-war remarks he made in private conversation, they extended his sentence for 3 more years. This is pediatrician Nadezhda Buyanova. Her case shows how far this repressive system is willing to go. She was arrested after the mother of a 7-year-old patient reported her. Allegedly, she made anti-war comments during a routine medical appointment. For that unproven remark, the state sentenced her to 5.5 years in prison. 5.5 years for something that had never made happen. Engineer Igor Baryshnikov was sentenced to 7.5 years for just 2 social media posts. Can you imagine 2 Facebook posts? Now he's in critical condition, quite literally hanging between life and death. His lawyer said, if Igor Baryshnikov is not included in an exchange this year, we may lose him. I could list the names of political prisoners endlessly. The 30 director Evgenia Berkovich, playwright Svetlana Petrichuk, Navalny's lawyers Vadim Kobzev, Alexei Lipser and Igor Sergunin, politician Lev Schlossberg, historian Alexander Skobov, journalist Antonina Favorskaya, mathematician Azat Miftakhov, artist Lyudmila Razumova, stand-up comedian Artemia Stanin. These are not isolated cases. They are part of systematic campaign of political repression. Many of them risk of dying in prison. They urgently need international attention. They need diplomatic pressure. They need your voice. Please help to save political prisoners in Russia. Thank you so much for your attention.
Distinguished guests, freedom fighters and human rights activists from all over the world, ladies and gentlemen. This is my second time speaking at the Geneva Summit for Human Rights and Democracy, and I'm very grateful to the organizers for making it possible for me to speak to you today. In 2022, I spoke about a country that I call home, Uganda, a nation of 50 million people living under the violent military dictatorship of General Yoweri Museveni, who has for 40 years twisted the law and used the military to stay in power. I told you of how I ran for president against him in 2021, how it was the most violent political campaign yet, and how he massacred hundreds of our people on the 18th and 19th of November 2020. How he shut down the internet on the eve of the election, imprisoned me inside my home for weeks, and then declared himself winner of the 2021 presidential election. Now, it is 2026, and here I am again, speaking to you at the Geneva Summit. Nothing has changed for the better, only going from bad to worse. Despite what happened in 2021, we were driven by hope to give it another try. So in 2025, I announced that I was running for president again. For 112 days, I traveled across the country campaigning, and the population turned up overwhelmingly. Yet again, our campaigns were violently attacked, our supporters were murdered, we were blocked from reaching many places, and were also blocked from several media stations. As usual, Museveni shut down the internet again, this time 3 days to the election. And what happened thereafter was not an election, but a military operation. The election was so rigged to the point that even at the polling station where Museveni voted for, he got much more votes than the actual registered voters in the register. Our polling agents in several places were arrested and whisked away. Several of our party officials were arrested and many abducted. 2 female deputy presidents of our political party were abducted and held incommunicado in a military barracks for 3 weeks before being thrown into a prison where they are languishing right at this moment. The military was deployed on our streets, shooting on spot whoever dared to challenge the criminality. It was under these circumstances that Museveni yet again declared himself winner of the election, this time with over 70% of the vote. Right now, I'm speaking to you while in hiding. This is because as soon as the election was finished, Museveni's son, who is also chief of the Ugandan military, issued an order to take me to him, dead or alive. The military acted on his order and raided my home. They tortured my family members, humiliated and undressed my wife, accusing her of hiding me. Meanwhile, they were recording and taking pictures of her, which the military chief later on shared on Twitter and bragged about capturing my wife. They also took over my home and surrounded it, and they are occupying my home as we speak right now. My wife and children had to flee the country for fear of their lives. I am in hiding, but I don't want to be in hiding. It was necessary though, so I can stay alive and be able to speak to you right now. I've said it before and I say it again, that have resurfaced at the right time in my country. I feel like the international community has abandoned us. They've ignored us, and they've left us to the fate of dictators. When I ran for president in 2021, Museveni and his thugs denied their crimes. They killed our people and denied it. They tortured people and denied it. They raided our houses and denied it. General Museveni has been a smart dictator because he puts on a suit, goes to the West and to the UN, speaks very nicely about democracy and human rights, but realistically, he does not mean any of those. He talks about our so-called Human Rights Commission in Uganda, but the same person closed the UN Human Rights Office in Uganda 2 years ago because they dared to question him about his atrocities. Now that is how he has been able to maintain a facade of democracy for 40 years and counting. But now Museveni is 83 years old, and his 51-year-old son, Muhoozi Kainerugaba, commands our military, the Uganda People's Defense Forces, more like Uganda's defense against his own people. And he's effectively in charge. Unlike his father, Muhoozi does not play the role of a good dictator. He openly and shamelessly says despicable things on social media. On Twitter, he openly confesses and brags about committing atrocities against the people of Uganda. When he was summoned by Parliament, he called Parliament a house of clowns and fools, and he threatened to arrest all of them. He describes judges of the Supreme Court of Uganda as clowns in wigs, and he has threatened to crush all journalists that dare to criticize his actions. In April last year, he abducted, detained, and tortured my close friend and bodyguard called Eddie Sebufu, also known as Eddie Mutwe. He later on posted on Twitter naked pictures of Eddie, boasting that Eddie Mutwe was in his basement learning Museveni's mother tongue, Bunyankole. Last month, he bragged about killing 22 of my friends, and he said that he's praying that I am the 23rd person for him to kill. In other words, Museveni and his son no longer fear international retaliation for their crimes. They've been so emboldened by your lack of action. They know that they can murder their own people, imprison them, torture them, remove their fingernails, push needles down their testicles, and nothing will happen to them. Now, they're using rape as a weapon. Boys and girls, men and women, people of all ages have reported being sexually assaulted by Muhoozi's military. And it's not rare. The majority of the people that they capture and unlawfully imprison have reported being raped, whether men or women. It is no longer possible, ladies and gentlemen, for the international community to deny Museveni's violence and atrocities. It's all over social media. And today, I am talking about it to you. Now, this is our call to action. The way I see it, if the international community continues to be complacent, then Uganda will go from bad to worse. Museveni and his son's military will massacre many more innocent Ugandans. You, ladies and gentlemen, in the Western world, will be forced to grapple with millions of Ugandan refugees pouring into your countries. And maybe then, the international community will come and commiserate with the people of Uganda, just like they did after the genocide in Rwanda, but it was too late. The second option is that the international community rises to the occasion. You stand by the values that you profess, democracy and human rights. You can rein in on General Museveni and his son through targeted sanctions as well as financial and legal pressures. Ladies and gentlemen, Ugandans are not seeking for pity. Ugandans are only seeking to see the world take action against the individuals that have violated their rights for far too long. Those that have abused democracy with impunity should be the starting point. Please sanction these individuals. Sanction General Museveni. Sanction General Muhoozi. Sanction all the police and military officers that are responsible for gross human rights violations. Sanction those commanders. Sanction the judicial officers that have aided criminality through deliberately misinterpreting the law or skewing it. Those that normalize electoral fraud. Those that remand to prison suspects that should actually be sent to hospital. Sanction these individuals because their combined efforts in the last election effectively give autocracy a blank check to rule over the people of Uganda for 5 years. We call upon the international community to treat General Museveni exactly how they treated Idi Amin, because Idi Amin did what he did to Ugandans for only 8 years. Museveni has done much worse to the people of Uganda, and it has been for 40 years and counting. Because of the inaction of the international community, Museveni's mode of dictatorship and human rights violations is being seen as acceptable in the region, and it must be stopped before it is exported to other countries in the region and in the continent. We ask the international community not to recognize Museveni's regime because it is not legitimate. Please terminate any forms of cooperation with this government because he is not legitimate. On our end, as the people of Uganda, we are committed to non-violent means of changing our country, non-violent means of putting an end to this 40-year-old dictatorship. And you can be sure that the people of Uganda will sooner or later free themselves, because oppressed people cannot stay oppressed forever. With your help, friends, with the help of the international community and development partners, we can change our country. We can liberate Uganda before it is too late. I thank you for listening to me, for God and my country.
Mega Promotion TV mwena abatugoberera nga bwe twabagambye tuli mu program eri e Geneva era nga bwe tubalengeza awo mulaba ndowooza olukiiko lwatudde dda akatambika Robert Kyagulanyi asinzidde ku mukutu gyali agambye gyali tasobola kwogerayo ali mu dduka kyova olaba asinzidde n'abanga ayita ku byampuliziganya annyonnyodde ebintu bingi nnyo bye tujja okuba nga tumenyaamenya mwena abatugoberera mubeere nga mubimanya. Ayogedde ku nsonga akalulu nga bwe katambula, famire ye nga bwe yalumbibwa, mukazi we nga bwe yayambulwa, ate CDF nakwata ebifaananyi ebyo ebimu ebyayambulwa ku mukazi we n'aba nga asobola okuba nga abitwitinga. Gwe wenna atambula naffe olunaku olwaleero tulaba nga summit etambula egenda mu maaso. Kyagulanyi ye Robert Sentamu essaawa zibadde ziwera 11 n'eddakiika 4 gennyini era kyemmanyi ayogeredde eddakiika zibadde nga 8 ku 10 eddakiika 10 zennyini ayogeredde n'abanga awa ensonga ze. Essaawa zino twagala kulaba biki reaction ki okuva kuba kutwala mukyala kati Sophia Aram yali ku stage. Twagala sooke tuwulire ki kyagamba ne reaction ki ze tugenda okuba nga tufuna okusinziira ku bigambo Robert Kyagulanyi byayogedde. Nja kujja n'enjopo tukubaganye ebirowoozo tulabe nti ebintu bino Robert Kyagulanyi byazze n'avayo n'abanga ayogera. Na aina byasabye ebitongole ebyensi yonna abazungu biki bye balina okukola. Aina ye amagezi ge gawadde ensonga ze zibadde nga 3 biki bye balina okukolera President Yoweri Museveni oba ne gavumenti ye. Era ayogeddeko n'okuwambibwa kw'aba Vice President be abawambibwa ne bamala ndowooza omwezi ennaku nga ziizo weeks 2 then ne balyoka babakuba mu makomera. Enjopo soko tuwe ku ddoboozi tusooke tulabe omukyala bawa reaction ki okuva ewa Kyagulanyi byayogedde twagala kumanya.
An accomplished athlete, an unwavering activist, a woman of rare courage. For generations of Afghan women, living already meant surviving. But since the Taliban seized power in August 2021, this reality has turned into a systematic assault on their rights. Girls have been excluded from classrooms, women have been erased from public life, dissenting voices have been silenced. We must call this by its name. It's a gender apartheid. And yet, despite the fear, despite the threats, despite the organized erasure, some refuse to disappear. Some refuse to be silent. Marzieh is one of them. Her story is one of resilience. Born in Iran to a family of Afghan refugees, she grew up in exile, in uncertainty, in the fragility of precarious status. As a child, she was expelled to Afghanistan after an attempted escape to Germany. 2 years later, back in Iran, she was denied schooling because she was undocumented. The doors of education were closed to her. She opened another. It was then that she discovered Taekwondo, a discipline that offered her what the world had denied her: confidence, strength, freedom. In 2019, after returning to Afghanistan, she quickly established herself as a multiple-time national champion. Her career took off. her future began to open. Then the Taliban returned, and with them the bans, the restrictions, the silence imposed on women, including female athletes. To continue living, training, hoping, she was forced to flee once again. Today, she is rebuilding her life in France, where she trains with the French national team. But if Marzier is a champion on the mat, she is above all a champion for women's rights. She refuses to use her voice only for herself. She raises it for all those who are being silenced. She turns her visibility into a platform, her determination into a fight, her courage into a message, and that courage comes at a cost. For her activism, she has received death threats. She lives under permanent police protection because even in France, she is not safe. Those who threaten her are not joking. And it is profoundly shameful that a woman who defends freedom, equality, and human dignity must still fear for her life on French soil. But she does not step back. She does not give up. In September, she published her book, They Will Not Have My Silence, with Baptiste Bérard-Proust, a title that is a promise, a powerful testimony of her journey, the story of a struggle, a tribute to all those women who refuse to be erased. I am fortunate to know this woman. I admire her strength. I admire her determination. I admire her steadfast refusal to yield to fear. Her courage compels us. Her fight commits us. For her unwavering dedication, for embodying the indomitable spirit of Afghan women, the Geneva Summit is proud to present her with the 2026 International Women's Rights Award. Please join me in welcoming her with all the respect, emotion, and admiration she deeply deserves. Marzier Hamidi, ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not here to tell you a sad story. I'm here to tell you the truth as I lived it. A truth about what happens when a system decides that women must disappear and boys must be reshaped into weapons. I know exactly who I was, but the regimes around me could not tolerate a woman with an identity. This is how I learned something early. Power does not fear weapons, it fears women who refuse obedience. I was born Afghanistani, I was born in Iran. But the country where I was born never accepted me as its own. I spoke the language, I lived there, and still I was treated as a temporary, repressible, invisible. This is how identity is erased, not by denying your existence, but by denying your rights.
Yes. Tukyagenda mu maaso alarm Mega Promotion TV mujja tusonyiwako abatugoberera kuba tulina emikutu mingi kwe tusitreamingira mwebale kubanga mutugoberera ate mubere nga musharinga awo n'abantu bannammwe babere nga mutuwabula ikyobo n'abalala mubawe program nga bwetambula. Mu ddakiika nga 10 emabegaawo His Excellency Robert Kyagulanyi mwenna mumuwulidde avuddeyo n'abanga ayogera. Kati mwenno nno abasinga mwagala kubuuza kati ki ekiddako, kubanga program bwetyo nga bwetambula oyo omukyala gwe mulaba bamuyita Mezaya Hamid, babadde bakavumuwa ekirabo. Omukyala oyo ava Afghanistan, advocate oba mulwanizi wa ddembe ly'abakyala. Omukyala oyo alwanira eddembe ly'abakyala, be bamu ku bantu abagenda okuba nga boogera paka we tunatuukira essaawa zigenda kubeera essaawa we zigenda okuweerera essaawa 12 ssaawa 12 n'eddakiika 12 n'eddakiika 25 we tugenda okumanya tugenda kubanga kye bayita call for action biki okusinziira ku Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu byabadde annyonnyola aba n'abo abantu abalala bali mu kwogera. Tugenda kulaba reaction okuva wa director of Policy and Project Center for Human Rights. Oyo nno ye mwami agenda okuba nga batuwa ki ekiddako oluvannyuma lwa Kyagulanyi biki byayogedde kye tuyitanga feedback olunaku olwaleero. So wakyaliyo abagenda okuba nga boogera be tugenda okuba nga tugumiikiriza. Ensonga enkulu kye mbadde njagala nti mwenna muyite abo abalala abatannaba tweyungako batweyungeko. Wakyaliwo ekinyusi kigenda kubeerawo ssaawa zigenda kubeera 12 n'eddakiika 25 we tugenda okumanya biki bano omukulu Robert Kyagulanyi byayogedde biki bye batuzeemu, kiki ekigenda okukolebwa okusinziira ku nsonga zaleese. Ensonga zonna ffenna tuziwulidde era twazoogeddeko awo. Ensonga nga bwe zibadde zitambula mu Uganda buli omu abadde azimanya, era Robert Kyagulanyi bye bimu ku byakoonyeeko era ayogeredde eddakiika zibadde 10. Kati mbadde njagala mu ddakiika ssaawa 12 n'eddakiika 25 tubeereko tufollowinge program nga bwegenda. Wakyabulayo ba speakers kati babiri, waliyo omwami gwe bayita Pedro Noseri wa Venezuela, oyo opposition leader yaddukira mu embassy ya gundi ya Argentina mu kibuga Caracas, naye nga ye ava Venezuela. Then wabulayo omwami omulala bamuyita Mezaya Alijad, oyo wa Iran journalist era nga alwanira n'eddembe ly'abakyala. Enjopo ogenda kugira nga otuwa ku abo ba speakers nga bwe tulindirire ssaawa 12 n'eddakiika 25 we tugenda okumanyira nti ebintu Robert Kyagulanyi byayogeddeko action ki egenda okuba nga etwalibwa mu maaso.
This is not education. This is how a generation is destroyed. Let me be absolutely clear. We don't want to live with the Taliban. We want a free Afghanistan. An Afghanistan with democracy, with a state where religion does not control women's body or people's mind. Yes, Afghanistan is a Muslim country, and it is also a country of many ethnicities, beliefs, and identities. All of them deserve protection. All of them deserve dignity. All of them deserve a democracy that respects belief, not one that weaponizes it. Stop calling the Taliban an Islamic Emirat. They are not an Emirat. They are not a government. They are terrorists. Do not normalize them with language. Nothing can normalize them. They were terrorists yesterday, they are terrorists today, and they will remain terrorists tomorrow. I know this not as theory, but as lived reality. They crossed the borders to silence me. They sent rape threats, death threats, messages describing exactly how they would kill me. Not because I carried a weapon, but because I spoke. This is what terrorists looks like. And yet, the world remains soft with terrorists because calling them terrorists has consequences, because recognition requires action, because normalization is easier than responsibility. That is why I am here today to say this clearly. The international community must recognize gender apartheid as a crime, not as a concept, not as a slogan, but as a crime under international law. Because gender apartheid is not a culture, is not religion, is not tradition. It is a system of domination. Recognizing gender apartheid as a crime will change everything. It will block the political normalization of the Taliban. It will delegitimize their rule, and it will finally deliver justice to Afghanistani women. This is not symbolic, this is strategic, this is legal, this is necessary. As an athlete, I learned something early. A woman controls her body cannot be ruled. That is why they ban women from sport, because discipline creates resistance, and resistance threatens power. Today, I live under police protection, not because I am violent, but because I refuse silence. That is the cost of truth under terrorism. Then I spoke about something else. I spoke about sport, about the Afghan national cricket team. I say this clearly. You cannot sit with terrorists, work with terrorists, represent terrorists, and pretend you're neutral. You cannot normalize terrorism and call it sport. And this is important. Sometimes the danger is not only the Taliban, it is the lobbyists, the institutions, the people who normalize them, give them platforms, and help them look acceptable. After I spoke about this, the threats begins. Call, messages, warnings. People ask me today, why were they so angry? That they were ready to kill me, to rape me. The answer is simple. Because first, I am a woman. Second, I am a free woman. And third, I am against their ideology. Fourth, I know exactly what they are doing. This is what terrifies them. My lawyer asked me, are you sure you want to continue this fight? It will be long, because the justice is always long. And it's dangerous. I did not hesitate. I said yes, because I have been fighting injustice since I was a teenager. And I will not stop now. Today, I live under police protection not because I choose violence, but I refuse silence. I left Afghanistan to be safe, and yet the same ideology followed me to Europe. Still, I am here. Today, you give me this award. I accept it, not as an honor alone, but as responsibility. And I dedicate it to the women of Afghanistan who are being erased in real life, and the women of Iran who are beaten and killed for refusing compulsory control over their bodies. Different regimes, same ideology, control women, erase identity, call it order. So do not ask us to coexist with terrorists. Do not ask us to compromise with gender apartheid. And do not ask us wait while generations are destroyed. We are not asking for inclusion, we are demanding liberation. And liberation has never been polite. Thank you.
Félicitations, Marcia, et au nom de la trentaine
tuli live tubatuusaako omukolo okugenda oba summit gye bayita Geneva summit eri Switzerland eyo mu kibuga Geneva. Omwami oyo gwe mulaba naye mukubiriza wa lukiiko era agenda kubaako key speaker omulala gwagenda okuba nga invitinga ajje okuba nga ayogerako nga bwe twabagambye nti mwenna abatugoberera ekinyusi kigenda kubeera mu ssaawa 12:25 we bagenda kyetuyita key action oba okwanukulwa eri abo baspiika bye bali okuba nga boogera eri olukiiko olwa Geneva. Enjopo ajja kutweyungako tumenyemenye ku nsonga zino tumanye Geneva eno esobola kuyamba etya ku bizibu ebyo abantu bye bali mu kwogera kuba tulaba buli omu ava mu nsi baspiika abajja buli omwaka aba bizibu. Tulaba omukyalo oyo Lopez ava Afghanistan era aweereddwa ne award mulwanizi wa ddembe naye mu bintu ebimu ayogedde gavumenti yabaagalako n'okumuleepinga baayagalako kwegamba yaddukamu eyo ensi nga bamulanga okulwanira eddembe ly'abakyala naye bamukozesa ebintu ebivve bingi nnyo nnyo. Kati omwami we bamuyita Brandon Silver yali ku stage yayita agenda okuba nga speaker agenda okuba nga addako. Byonna tugenda kuba tubimenyaamenya tubuzaayo aboogezi ndowooza nga babiri then tugende ku kinusi mu ddakiika 25 eziyise ku saa 12 tujja kuba tukomawo. So nkugamba gwe ali ku mukutu subscribing ayita ne banno tetunabatuuka ku kinyusi kyennyini nnyini tubeere nga tutambula. So enjopo soko tuwe ku mwami oyo tuwulize.
Echoing in the halls of the United Nations, not the voices of their oppressors. The courageous women of Iran and Afghanistan are fighting not only for their freedom, but on behalf of us all. Indeed, the mass domestic repression of these terrorist regimes, if left unchecked, metastasizes from domestic repression into external aggression, into transnational repression, as you heard about from speakers earlier today. And this has hit close to home in Canada as well, and in many free nations. If he was with us in person, my mentor, Professor Kotler, the former Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, and one of the first speakers here at the Geneva Summit 18 years ago, he used to come and speak here every year. He cannot be with us in person here today because he is subject to a transnational repression plot by the Islamic Republic of Iran, threatened by assassination simply for speaking out for human rights. So the struggles that the brave women of Iran and Afghanistan are leading on the ground, if we do not support them, those same terrorist regimes will come to attack us here wherever we live. And we know exactly who are behind these attacks. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps were behind the targeting of Masih. They were behind the targeting of Professor Kotler. And they are the ones brutalizing the people of Iran in the streets today. They should be designated as a terrorist organization and their affiliates on our soil prosecuted. Canada, the US, the European Union have designated them as terrorist organization. The United Kingdom and other free states should be encouraged to do so as well. So don't just walk out of the Islamic Republic's speeches at the Palais des Nations this week and next. That would be a good first step. Sanction them, designate them as terrorist regime. They should not be allowed, those individual architects of repression, to enjoy the freedoms abroad that they crush of Iranian citizens at home. The Supreme Leader Khamenei and his criminals visiting here in Geneva, including Abbas Araghchi, Qasem Garibabadi, Afsaneh Nadipur, should be subject to Magnitsky-style targeted sanctions for their human rights violations and blocked from ever stepping foot anywhere else. This should be their last trip to any democratic nation. It is a shame that they are in Switzerland. They should never step foot in any free society again. They cannot use our banks, our businesses, and our beaches while butchering the Iranian people, and they should be subject to targeted Magnitsky sanctions. But this discussion about Iran, about Afghanistan, is a microcosm of all the cases we heard discussed on the stage today. We are witnessing a global authoritarian culture of corruption and criminality underpinned by impunity, where the dictators of the world are meeting next door, while the international community far too often stands silent in the face of their atrocities. Each and every one of our brave summit speakers here today came with a message, giving words to the unspeakable and finding the courage to share what is happening in their homelands and in their hearts, a cri de coeur for action. And so we must call on our governments to raise all the cases you heard about today, publicly, prominently, persistently, at every opportunity, whether at the UN or beyond it. And even at the UN, our democratic nations are often given the opportunity to talk about these cases, talk about these atrocities, to raise the plight and pain of political prisoners and their families fighting for their freedom, but choose not to do so. So whether in the Human Rights Council, in resolutions, in statements at the Universal Periodic Review, or bilaterally with the states that are often causing these harms that they meet with anyhow, they should be raising the cases of these political prisoners and demanding their immediate and unconditional release. Again, these free nations are far too silent when they have the opportunity to do so. The very least they can do is be raising the names of these dissidents and these victims to these regimes and demanding their freedom. But taking action for human rights is not only for governments to do, it is not only about laws, but about lives. And not just about how we litigate, but about how we live. Each of us here today can do our part in our own way, whether that is speaking to our elected officials, writing for our local newspapers, or posting on social media. Many of the released political prisoners who've taken to this stage after finding freedom year after year at the Geneva Summit often talk about how this solidarity from around the world, something that might be as seemingly small or ordinary as the act of sending them a letter when they were in prison, actually had an extraordinary effect. Because writing that letter, or writing about them in a paper, or posting about them on social media, simply mentioning their name on a stage, tells them when they're in prison that they're not forgotten, that they're not alone. And it also tells the perpetrators and those oppressing them that they are being watched and that their crimes are not being forgotten, that the world cares and that we will not relent until they are free. And while that day may seem too distant, and while it is otherwise easy to succumb to cynicism and despair after hearing all of the atrocities described today, and the government inaction that underpins these crimes, I conclude this conference with hope. Because when I look into the audience and I see the heroes who spoke today and all the members of civil society who have come together to support them, I see living, fighting proof that freedom prevails in every part of the world. We saw Leopoldo Lopez, who emerged from the torture of Ramo Verde prison in Venezuela to found the World Liberty Congress. Aram Akil, who survived ISIS captivity to become a leading voice for the Kurdish people. Kim Yumi, who escaped North Korea, perhaps the most repressive totalitarian state, to give voice to those still suffering there. And we heard from Blessing Malunga, who resisted persecution in Zimbabwe and prosecution for his journalism, to take the stage and speak the truth and commit to continue to fight for media freedom. So we see that across every continent, each and every person who spoke today personally embodies that hope for the future and for freedom. And because of them, I believe that with your help, a future Geneva summit will likewise see the political prisoners highlighted today, like Pastor Ezra Jin, like those in Russia, highlighted by Marina, and all those who spoke of the prisoners in Venezuela, Vietnam, Cuba, Iran, Belarus, Hong Kong, that eventually they will be here to take the stage in Freedom and Geneva Summit. And in Pakistan as well, in the imprisonment of Imran Khan, all those being persecuted by regimes engaging in oppression around the world, that we will see them in solidarity here on stage. Because as Martin Luther King Jr. used to say, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I would add that it is because of the brave, noble, and inspiring individuals who spoke earlier today, those dissidents on the front lines of the struggle for our collective shared values and the future of humanity. It is because of them that this moral arc continues to bend. So may all the painful testimonies we heard today may not only be an act of remembrance, but a remembrance that, like these brave heroes, we must always act. Thank you.
abatugoberera mwebale kubanga mutugoberera ku mikutu gyaffe Mega Promotion TV. Bwe tutyo tukyabatuusaako summit ekyagenda mu maaso. Omwami naavuddeko ye agambye nti bakinot oba abantu abajja okujja oba bagenda oba ebintu bye boogedde bireme kubeera for remembrance oba bya kijjukizo, bireme kubeera nga bajjukira Bugundi yajjawo, naye kibeere nga kikola kiteekebwamu action. So ebitongole ebitwala eddembe ly'obuntu mu nsi yonna babayita okuteekawo action. So tulaba baki speakers bakyagendera ddala mu maaso, bakyayogera then we tugenda okutuukira ku kinyusi ng'essaawa 12:25 nga bwe nabategeezezza tubuzaayo ndowooza nga omu babiri bamalirize tugende ku ssaawa 12:25 ate tubatuuseko action ki ze bagenda okuba nga kye tuyita call for action kyekigenda okuba nga kisembayo era nga kigenda kukulirwa Brandon Silver ye director wa policy project center for human rights agenda okuba nga akola ki akiggala ssaawa zigenda kuba 12:25 kasooke tuwulizeeko byonna tujja kujja tubitemetemerumu kasooke tuwulizeeko ku mwami ono ate agenda okuba nga ayogera enjoposoko tuwe ku ddoboozi ly'oyo mwami
Giacomo, Francois Logiacomo. Please go to the registration desk. Congratulations on receiving a very meaningful reward. Friends, to conclude, after an emotional day like this, it is easy to feel the weight of injustice, but I believe there are real reasons for hope, and you saw them here today. Now, dictators today are not so confident, they're defensive. Regimes that jail poets, that arrest teenage girls, that censor students are not strong. They're afraid. And when a government fears a song or a scarf, it reveals its fragility. Second, the information monopoly is broken. A video from Tehran, testimony from Khartoum, a message from Hong Kong, within minutes they reach the world. Now, it's true that regimes try to shut down the signal. Iran's regime, for a very long period, shut down the internet. But in the end, they cannot unplug and shut down a generation that knows how to reconnect. Third, courage is no longer isolated. And we heard it from Leopoldo and Massi. The activist in Caracas knows the dissident in Minsk. The student in Kabul draws strength from the lawyer in Moscow. What once were scattered sparks are now a widening flame. Fourth, accountability. Accountability once that was unthinkable. Today it's real. Finally, the EU designated sanctions on the IRGC. The dictator Nicolas Maduro is facing justice. It's not enough, but impunity is no longer automatic. Finally, tyrants can fill prisons, they can deploy police, they can block websites, but they cannot force people to believe them. They cannot make lies become truth, and they cannot stop free men and women from standing up again and again and again. So here at the Geneva Summit, truth still has a platform, and it matters. It matters. So I want to thank all of the ambassadors who joined us today and yesterday at the United Nations. We had many of them. We urge you, as Brandon said, take up their cases, take up their causes at the United Nations and elsewhere. It's very important. And finally, I want to thank our larger audience, all of you, students, citizens, activists, for being here. You know, one powerful way that you can make a difference is to expand our global audience online. Give voice to the voiceless. Go to the Geneva Summit accounts on YouTube, X.com, Instagram, and so forth, Facebook. Watch and share all of the videos from the speeches you heard today on the various pages. Follow our courageous speakers on their social media accounts. It's vital that you share their stories. Make sure that no one at the United Nations or in the international community can ever say, we didn't know. Don't let them say we didn't know. So I want to thank finally all of our dedicated interpreters, our photographers, videographers, logistique. And on behalf of our 30 co-sponsoring NGOs, I want to express our profound appreciation and gratitude to the entire incredible Geneva Summit team of staff and volunteers who worked so hard to make this happen, led by the incredible Chloe and Eileen for their superb work and dedication over many, many months. You gave your all over long days and late nights with meticulous preparations, creativity, devotion to our speakers to organize yet another magnificent and meaningful Geneva Summit. So with that, I thank all of you for supporting the 18th Annual Geneva Summit for Human Rights and Democracy. I look forward to seeing you next year at the 2027 Geneva Summit. In the words of Nobel Peace Prize laureate Elie Wiesel, quote, "We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented." Thank you very much. I now invite all of the speakers, everyone who spoke today, please come up on stage for a group photo. Everyone who spoke on stage, please come up for a group photo. Please. All right, before we call up the rest on stage, do you want to hear? I want to, on behalf of all of our speakers, we want to invite the main organizer, Chloe, to please come forward to receive thanks and appreciation from all of the speakers. For doing an incredible job to organize this event. Picture, Chloe, come in the middle. Let's take a picture with it. And now I want to invite all the staff, all the Geneva Summit staff and volunteers, please come up on stage. All of the Geneva Summit volunteers and staff, please come up on stage for the group photo. Some on this side too, if you like. Come, both sides. And you have to look at only one person's camera. It's Oliver. You don't see the cameras there. They're only Oliver's camera. It's the only one that you see. Thank you.
All right. Buterevu njaga kubanga nkwebaza weebale kubanga otambula naffe yonna gy'osinzidde Mega Promotion TV gwe wenna atula ku YouTube ne ku mikutu emirala gyonna tukyatambulira ddala bulungi nnyo nga bwe mbagambye nti summit bwetyo bwetambula mpola mpola tubadde tugenze mu bifaananyi awo okubanga ebifaananyi bakubibwa ebifaananyi buli muntu ayogedde avuddeyo n'aba nga awa biki ebigenda mu maaso ku bintu ebimu ebigenze mu maaso tulaba nga ba key speakers oba n'abantu aba hostinze summit eno bavuddeyo ne bagaa nti ku luno ebintu bino ebyogeddwa bireme kubeera for remembrance wabeerewo action naye tubadde tulindirira nga bwe tulindirira ekisembayo kyebayita ekibadde ku program kibadde essaawa 12:25 call for action oba ki ekigenda okuba nga kikolerwa era nga kikuliddwa nga kigenda kukulirwa omukulu Brandon Silver ye director wa Police for Project Center. Tubadde twagala okulaba nga bwe tukyakwasaganya enjopo bwakyakwasaganya okulaba oba wakyaliwo ebigendera ddala mu maaso kubanga tufunyemuko ku buzibu bwa intaneti. Twagala kumanya biki tufunyemu kiki era n'enjopo bw'onooba omaze ng'omaziriza okwasaganya tugenda discussing ekintu kino kati tubadde tukirindiridde. Uganda nga Uganda oba omulwanizi w'eddembe ly'obuntu oba ffe abaagala enkyukakyuka tukifunyemu tutya. Yes, President tumulabye ayogedde ensonga zonna aziripresentinze bulungi naye oluvannyuma lw'okubanga bano abanyonyodde ebigenda mu maaso action ki egenda okuba nga etwalibwa tunakifunamu nga gwe Munnayuganda ekintu kino buli lunaku tubadde tukirindirira tulina engeri gye tukifunyemu reaction egenda kuba etya okuva mu bano abantu bagenda tuyamba batya. So byebyo ebimu bye tugenda okuba nga twogerako. So summit bwetyo bwegenze. Robert Kyagulanyi tulaba ebigambo ebimu bye yayogedde olunaku tubadde tubyogera byebyo ebibadde okulumba amaka ge mukazi we kati takyali mu ggwanga n'abaana baddukamu kati naye agambye waasinzidde ali mu hiding. So enjopo weebale kubanga olwaleero okwasaganya ensonga
Muganda wange Hudu webale nnyo webalire ddala okubeera nga naawe oneyunzeeko oba nga tukola okusobola okulaba nga tuweereza bannayuganda ku nsonga eza Geneva Summit nga bwe zibadde, era mbadde ngezaako okulaba nga twongera ddala okubeera nga tulagira ddala paka ku actions abasajja bagenda kuba nga bazzaako ki in case kuba omukulu Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu tumulabyeko awo nga asaba basanctioning abazze nga bakola ebikolobero ku bannayuganda oba okubakolako ebikolwa ebitali bya buntu okusinziira nga bw'abadde agezaako okuba nga annyonnyola. Tulabyeko ng'agamba nti mukyala we abaana basobola okubeera nga bafuluma eggwanga naye era nga ensonga ye nga bw'aziraba nti abasajja bano baagala kumumiza muki musu naye nga agamba nti ye ayagala okubeera mu nsi ye singa ebaamu eddembe sigamba nti mbutayagala kubeera mu nsi ye. Hudu kino ekintu okiraba otya? Buli omu yandibadde nga ayayanira okubeera mu nsi ye oba nga akoze ensobi oba nga takoze ensobi, ne tuze nga tukiraba kuba n'abalala bangi nnyo bavuddeyo nga bansi za njawulo okusinziira okulaba nga balina ensonga ze bamenyaamenya, abamu tebakyali mu nsi zaabwe era nga baagala okubeera nga baddayo mu nsi zaabwe olw'okuba nti bagamba nti badikiteeta. Muyinza okulowooza munnange newamwe ekisibo ekiri naye ssebo ndabyeko abasajja wa Venezuela, Afghanistan, amawanga mangi nnyo, buli omu akaaba bw'oba nga weesimbawoko ku bukulembeze obw'eggwanga oba n'okuba nga ogezaako olwanirako ku ddembe ly'obuntu. Waliwo omukyala awo abadde alwanirira ku ddembe ly'abannamawulire naye ng'olabira ddala naye embeera gy'alimu si nnyangu.
Waliwo omulala nno yali awakanya lutalo olwa Russia okulumba Ukraine naye ebyo ebimu ku byakola ki byebimu ku byamugira ebibanga bimugulumbya okuva mu nsi ye. Enjopo oyogeddeko ku bintu ebimu Robert Kyagulanyi pulezidenti wa NUP byavuddeyo n'agamba nti bye musobola tuyambako okukyusa embeera eno eri mu ggwanga musobola n'otuyambako okusala ku ssente ze musindika ne mutadiringa na gavumenti ya President Museveni. N'ekirala ekimu Kyagulanyi kyayogedde era enjopo kibagambye kwe kuteekawo sanctions ku bantu abamu abavunaanyizibwa kubanga Robert Kyagulanyi agambye mulimu abantu nga bo bavunaanyizibwa personally nga bali emisango bagizza bo nga bo abantu. Then ekirala Kyagulanyi Ssentamu kyagambye obutali cognizinga gavumenti ya mukulu President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. Then n'omuntu omulala gwasimbyeko ennyesera ye omwami CDF Muhoozi era ayogeddeko nga omuntu mukwano gwe Edi Sebufu amuyite Edi Mutwe nga bwe yateekebwa mu basement ne tweets CDF ze yavaayo n'abanga ayogerako era Robert Ssentamu ayogedde ne ku ntulugunya gye batulugunyamu abantu nga bamaze obbawamba abamu babafumita pini mu bitundu byabwe ebyekyama n'ebintu ebirala bingi, abantu abattibwa oluvannyuma lw'okugibwako intaneti byonna abantu 22 nti CDF yatwitinga n'agamba bali 22 tubasse gwe Bobi Wine ogenda kuba wa 23. Ebigambo bino bibadde byogerwa Kyagulanyi tubitemyetemye naye ensonga ekibuuzo kyo ekigenda sigala kigenda kuba kimu nti ebigambo ebyo byonna byogeddwa tugenda funiramuwa era tugenda yambizibwamuwa. Ndowooza ebyo bijja kubeera mu programu zaffe zinaddako nga tumaze okulaba kubanga ebintu ebisinga ebibadde mu eno summit reaction zigenda kufulumizibwa tulabe reaction ki okusinzira ku byogeddwa mu nsi eno n'eno reaction ki ezateekingiddwa oluvannyuma lw'okusoma ku reactions ezigenda oteekingibwa kubanga jjukira olukiiko lw'abazungu nominates ziba zikapitulingibwa then ne reactions zisofuluma mu biwandiiko. Kati mu programu zaffe ezinaddako beera nga tosobwa programu zaffe buli lunaku tubeera tu streaminga live beera nga otweyungako tubeera tukuwa amawulire agatambula gwe wenna abadde yeebuuza nti tuzaako ki mukolo guno summit eno etuyambye ki mu programu zaffe eziddako tugenda kujja n'ebiwandiiko namutayiika ebisalawo biki action kiki ze baba nga bagenda kwata oluvannyuma lw'olukiiko luno. So Mega Promotion TV tulabira ddala mwongedde twagala mwebale nnyo kubanga mutugoberera live zaffe zibeerangayo nnyo buli kimwe kiba kigenda mu maaso tukibatuusaako wano ku Mega Promotion TV teweerabira ne ku mikutu emirala gye tuli osobola tusanga ne ku TikTok Mega Promotion TV so bwe tutyo bwe tutambudde olunaku olwaleero summit bwetyo bwetambudde naye nga bwe mbasuubiza nti mu programu zaffe teweerabira nnyo anyiga akadde kajja kuba kakutegeeza nti kati essaawa zino tugenda genda live nti mu programu zaffe enkya ezinaddako tugenda kuba tutematema olukiiko luno nga bwe lubadde ne action kiki zeba respondinze oluvannyuma kubanga abantu bano abakiyise mu summit eno babadde banki nga buli omu tasobola kuweebwa muzindalo kwogera kinagenda mu maaso naye reaction okuva mu abo abantu ababaka abo ababadde bakiyise kyemmanyi zijja kujja mu buwandiike enjo pompozi ng'olina akatalekeka
mpozi nga bwe tubagambye nti kujja kubanga tufuba nnyo okulaba nga tubaleetera buli kimu nga bwe kinaaba kibadde terowooza nti bakomye ku bukomyi awo ne balina okuba nga balina actions bagenda okubeera nga bagoberera okubeera nga bassaawo tulowooza nti bajja buzinga bonagamba nti bakoze meetingi y'ekyalo wemuvuddemu nti ate oli embuzi omukolo gwawedde so njagala okwebaza mwena abagibaddeko Mega Promotions TV obudde nga buno n'abakyagiriko mwebali kusubscribinga mwebali kubeera ng'ensonga muzikwasaganyiza ddala bulungi nnyo abaganda baffe abayisiraamu n'abakatuliki bano abakristaayo nalabye nabo babasiize olunaku olwaleero evvu kitegeeza ekisibo kiba kitandise so katusabe mukama atuyambe nti mu maaso awo ekisibo tugenda kubeera nga ate idi wetuukira ku idi ng'ate era ye Easter hudu mbigambo bibiri bisatu sibula kubatulaba abaliko nga bastreaminga live.
Alright, njagala kubebaza bwebazi anakwogera ku subscribing ekyoba nnyo kyolina okukola nyiga akadaako bw'ona okanyiga bwe wanaabangayo ebigenda mu maaso kajja kuba kakutegeeza nti waliwo ekigenda mu maaso ojje olabe ebintu bingi nnyo bye tutambuza wano programu ezisomesa ate bw'oba omaze eno programu genda ku programu zaffe endala era ku YouTube kuno ogenda ozirabe zisomesa zirimu okuyigiriza zirimu okunoonyereza njagala nange kubebaza abasiibi mu madini gonna ag'enjawulo musibe kansuubire ndowooza n'abantu abadde bakola ebintu ebirumya bannaabwe nabo bagenda kyusaako mu guno omwezi omutukuvu nja kubanga mbebaza nnyo okuva ifa lwe twatandise essaawa za 10:00 ndowooza ngaana paka ssaawa zino ziri 12:34 Mega Promotion TV abeera nga teweerabira kunyiga kadde na subscribinga so bwetyo bwe tutambudde olunaku olwaleero tusinkana olunaku olw'enkya tusoose okutandika ssaawa zijja kubanga 7 nze mbasiibudde ate muberenga mutugoberera.
Oyagala okumanya ebifo mu nsi nga bwetambula biki ebifa ku serebuwo ebisanyusa wamu n'ebikuzimba oyagala okumanya ebifa mu entertainment industry mu nsi yonna okutwaliza awamu okunnoka ogatta n'amawulire agafa mu sekita ez'enjawulo tugoberere ku YouTube, Facebook, Twitter ne TikTok. Mega Promotions TV. Oyagala okumanya ebifo mu nsi nga bwetambula biki ebifa ku serebuwo ebisanyusa wamu n'ebikuzimba oyagala okumanya ebifa mu entertainment industry mu nsi yonna okutwaliza awamu okunnoka ogatta n'amawulire agafa mu sekita ez'enjawulo tugoberere ku YouTube, Facebook, Twitter ne TikTok. Mega Promotions TV. Oyagala okumanya ebifo mu nsi nga bwetambula biki ebifa ku serebuwo ebisanyusa wamu